Hello everyone, welcome to the Cybersecurity and DDoS Hangout presented by Nexusguard. This is an ongoing Hangout series where we talk about the latest and greatest in distributed denial of service attacks and cybersecurity issues, everything you need to know to keep your company safe online. I'm your host, Mia Voss, and today we're talking with Gabriel C. Murphy, one of my favorite guests. Let me talk to you about him and tell him why he's on the show with us. Gabriel is a serial entrepreneur who has co-founded 4 internet companies and is a subject matter expert in applying developed technology to a business in an effort to help manage, obtain performance insights, or gain competitive advantage through homegrown software. He's also a subject matter expert in applying developed technology to a business in an effort to help management obtain performance insights or gain a competitive advantage. Welcome to the show, Gabriel. It's great to see you again.
Good to see you again. Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. We have a lot to cover. So this is our 3rd episode. We're going to be focusing not only on some of the latest news and events in the cybersecurity landscape, but also some things to keep an eye on for 2016, because it is looming and coming up on us, right?
It is. You know, it's a crazy world out there, and there's more and more attacks going on. They're increasing in scale and complexity, and so it's going to be fun talking about this today because it's such a serious matter for so many enterprises out there trying to deal with this very subject matter.
Absolutely, and that's one of the things that we find, that it's always something new. There's always somebody out there who has too much time on their hands and really wants to create nefarious things that'll trip up a lot of businesses. Absolutely. So,
right.
Do me a favor before we get started, though. Tell us what's going on with you, and tell us about your business and how you got started.
Certainly. Well, I've been dealing in internet technologies for the last 20 years, advising various startups and dealing specifically with security as it relates to M&A activities. So as we would acquire companies, we would end up having to do very deep security analysis on the various servers and things that we were acquiring. And so through the years, I've gained a lot of insights into the evolving various scale of network issues and security issues that companies are facing these days.
And it's a growing industry, right? You're never going to be out of a job.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Okay, so we've talked about this before on previous shows, but ransomware attacks are gaining popularity. Let's talk about that.
Yes, they are. I mean, just even recently, you have this issue of Proton Mail, who has paid a ransom, not because they necessarily wanted to, but because they were being hit so hard with an infrastructure-level attack that their ISP put pressure on them to ultimately pay the 18 or whatever bitcoins it was in order for this attack to cease. Additionally, it was followed up with an even higher level attack that it was alleged was state-sponsored. So it almost looks like it's a level of bait and switch, which is a whole new level of sophistication for DDoS attacks. And that's what we're seeing these days as these cyber criminals continue to evolve and their methods and bandwidth continues to get cheaper. This will be the effect, and this is the new world that we end up living in. And companies are now faced with how to deal with these very serious and real threats around them.
I think part of the sophistication as well is the fact that it shifts, that it's not just a one solution thing like that. You can't just come up with one solution. You've got all this pressure. Again, like the Bitcoin thing, I mean, it's really complicated, and they do that on purpose.
That's right. Well, Bitcoin's used on purpose, and various other platforms are used on purpose, not just financial, but communication, where it's very difficult to trace the origins of those funds, and so they take advantage of the technology that is able to be used in a nefarious way, along with cheap bandwidth and good resources.
They definitely prey on the atmosphere of fear for people, so they're scared. They just want to do anything to make it stop. So do you think more people will end up paying ransom? Because I know obviously Proton Mail took a lot of criticism for paying that.
Yes, I think you have to bifurcate it between enterprise versus people, both of which are going to be continuing to be subject to DDoS attacks and ransomware. sort of levels attacks, I think people are going to be more prone to pay because out of fear and loss of various files that have not been backed up. Whereas enterprises, they have more of a reputation issue to deal with, and so there's other factors at work that cause these enterprises to instead either not only not pay, but also double down and say, okay, well, we're going to pay 5 times to the group that can identify and contain the group that's taking on this DDoS attack, that's instigating it.
So it's like a bounty type of thing, right?
Absolutely, and we've seen a variety of companies come back with that sort of response.
Sure, they're like, okay, we're going to up the ante on you and really take it to the next level, which again is just such a terrible way for atmosphere for business. Again, it's everybody's responding to fear, and it's kind of a violent atmosphere. That's
right, but the key here is to not have a business get put itself in the first place, having to decide whether or to pay a ransom or to not, or to double down. If they properly implement a good DDoS mitigation strategy and look at various companies in the market that provide these services, again, the key to having this not happen is prevention and implementing a good strategy.
You can almost throw down the mic and walk off the stage. I know Nexusguard, our host, obviously has a lot of great strategies for that as well. And speaking of which, if you're just tuning in, you're watching the Cybersecurity and DDoS Hangout presented by Nexusguard. I'm Mia Voss, and I am talking with Gabriel Murphy. He's going to throw down even more information for us today. So, but that's really true. I mean, it really is about the protection, so you can live in fear. And I know they are very good at coming up with new ways, but you have to stay on guard and on point and make sure that you're protected, right?
That's right, and the level, again, of sophistication is rising. It's something that is very difficult for an enterprise to keep in-house and have those resources in-house. Much like a variety of other IT services, this is one that's naturally outsourced. And so companies, in my view, are best served to find a company that deals specifically with this key part of an IT service that's needed for any company that's operating an internet presence.
So we're going to jump real quick, and I agree with you 100%. So here's the next good subject. So many cybersecurity studies show that often the biggest risk comes not from the outside, but from employees in a company who aren't following protocol. Let's talk about that. And in your experience, do you think this rings true?
There's no doubt about it. Companies are run by people, and people make mistakes.
Mm-hmm. Everybody thinks they're sort of a small cog, right? They're like, well, I can just get away with this. I'm going to download this one thing. It's not going to make a difference.
Right, or I'm going to breach protocol because the password is easier to remember if I do this, and I override best practices. Right. And that's generally where it starts, is companies take time to implement best practices, but it is the people that breach those practices and end up compromising the entire system. And all it takes is one person to compromise the system for a hacker to have an opportunity to intrude and compromise the entire network.
So following with that, and you just mentioned it specifically, passwords. I know personally for myself, I do have the two-step. I have it that I have to have a text. But we all go through that where we're like, oh, extra step password. We're in a hurry. We're at a stoplight, something like that, and we get annoyed with the passwords. So specifically with that, with passwords to work portals and intranet, many employees are using, you just mentioned that, very low-risk passwords, which are easy to breach. What kind of advice would you give regarding passwords?
Well, I mean, there's a variety of things. Obviously, having alphanumeric 15-digit, the sort of thing that people don't like to remember, is, a best practice. And then two-step is becoming more common across all industries. And so it's really common sense stuff these days. Being able to get a text message or an email on any suspicious activity. A lot of ecosystems support these additional security measures because they don't want to have to be compromised as their ecosystem grows. And so take advantage of the tools that the various ecosystems afford for, whether it's an enterprise, we could talk about Dropbox, all these other platforms that afford their end users the ability to have these additional security measures. So make sure you take advantage of those.
What are some other ones besides Dropbox?
Well, that's just for file storage, and I just use that as an example of,
Sure.
and there, whether it's email, whether it's 1Password, or all the different ecosystems that we may or may not use, they all allow and support two-step authentication and having super secure passwords and things like that. And so it's really at this point almost unforgivable that people don't take the time to set up their and have good personal practices for their passwords and the management thereof.
Here's a random question. How often do you think people should change their passwords?
I think if you're using best practices, you should never change your passwords, because your password's already extremely good and very difficult for anyone to guess, so why would you change it? And you hear a lot of people say that, I change my password every 6 months. Well, that sort of thing encourages a person to remember something easier, knowing that they're going to have to change it every 6 months or they're so often.
Good point.
A really good password doesn't need to be changed. It's very secure and will last a lifetime.
Oh, I think that's just one of the most important things I've heard said. It's so simple, but you're right. If you have a really good password, you wouldn't have to change it. And I think you do start to compromise yourself because you're changing. And like, again, this is typical me. I think I represent the typical person.
Right.
My password. So, and on that note, I will give a cautionary tale. I do have someone who is really big on Google Plus and in the cybersecurity or in the online world, and his YouTube account was hacked. He did not have the two-step process, and boy, did they really take advantage of his YouTube channel. And I'm sure you can imagine how that went. It was information uploaded that was not typical of him at all. And then, unfortunately, he also YouTube didn't care, even though he was somebody who was very influential, and shut down his YouTube channel for a while.
Right, and the takeaway here is that when it comes to cyber criminals preying on individuals, generally they're going to prey on those that are the most likely to be exploited, those that have the easy passwords to remember because they use common techniques such as brute force attacks and things like that. And so just by having good secure passwords and two-step authentication across all the platforms that are important to you, you are going to be so far ahead of your fellow individuals and therefore very unlikely to be a target to such cyber criminal activity.
All right, so going on my to-do list is to come up with a very complicated password that I'm going to use. Another quick question, would you suggest using that same password across all of your platforms for me for Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, any of that? Is that another thing you suggest, same password?
Yeah, and I think we talked about this on the last Hangouts discussion. I actually recommend two different passwords. One for the private, sometimes even three. One for if you lost it, there's no foul, versus documents that are private, your email, versus ultra-secure documents that you might have on file storage systems.
Perfect.
So either two or three, depending on how much usage you have.
Gotcha, gotcha. Okay, and if you're just tuning in, you're watching the Cybersecurity and DDoS Hangout, and this was presented by Nexusguard. I'm talking with Gabriel C. Murphy, and we just gave you a ton of great information about passwords. So we're going to move on here. What do you feel are the best ways for businesses to prevent against DDoS attacks? So we just went through a couple things, but give me some more.
Well, the best thing to do is to, again, recognize that it's a service best outsourced and find a company that specializes in preventing DDoS attacks, nothing more, nothing less, because it itself is such a big risk factor to a business that it is something that you wouldn't want to outsource to, say, your email service provider, even though you may have an existing relationship there. It's something that needs to be outsourced to a company that specializes just in DDoS prevention, investments, and things of that nature.
Gotcha, gotcha. So what about smaller businesses and one-man operations like myself?
Well, there's certainly things that you can do other than just sit back. I'm sure you have a server somewhere running your mail, and keeping that server updated with the most recent patches and things of that nature. Open source software makes it very easy to take time to update all your security patches. That, again, just like having good password practices, will keep you one step ahead of everyone else. Most of the vulnerabilities out there are due to companies not keeping their OS up to date, and so these exploits that are found are then just run across all the various hosts, and they find the victims and use that as a botnet to implement a DDoS attack on some specific target, just to give you an idea of how that works. And so just by having your software updated, and you can outsource that for very cheap, that keeps small businesses one step ahead.
I think, again, that's something that they prey on, is the fact that we're all very, very busy, and I think it's, setting up a process that you have at this time, at this month, I'm going to do this, this, and this. They have all the time in the world to sit there and wait for somebody to forget to update things, unfortunately. So I think that's right. A great piece of advice. So from your perspective, what have been some of the biggest changes in the world of DDoS this year in cybersecurity?
Certainly the growing level of sophistication of the attacks. Bandwidth continues to get cheaper, and so therefore the attacks get much more sophisticated in terms of the throughput that's pushed towards the specific host. We've seen attacks now reach 100 gigabytes per second, and that's a tremendous amount of traffic to load onto a single host that's not expecting to take on that load. And that's an infrastructure level attack that then implements various upstream providers, and in the case of a ransomware attack, it'll have a trickle down effect of the upstreams putting pressure on the intended target to pay the ransom, which again is what we saw with Proton Mail. I think we'll see more of those as these sophistication levels continue to rise.
What do you think the average cost is for a business for an attack?
It depends on the business. I've seen it range from anywhere from $500 an hour, and I'm talking on an enterprise level,
yes,
to upwards of $500,000 an hour in terms of the lost revenue potential. You think of retailers this time of year that they're calculating their sales on an hourly basis. So that, coupled with loss of reputation, which may be difficult to quantify, but that's also a major factor at play. And so all of these things weigh in, and it ends up being a very costly endeavor. So again, it's something that gets a lot of attention because we're seeing more and more companies fall victims to these cyber criminals who understand that this is all about money, and you look at the amount of money that they have pulled out of ransom, and it is staggering. And so that is the fuel driving, at the end of the day, these cyber criminals. It's all about money.
Right, and as you mentioned, damaged reputations, that in some ways is not quantifiable, except that if you just completely lose your business from it, if you have to shut your doors.
Right. Well, in a DDoS attack, as you know, it keeps the intended users to the toast target from visiting. So in the case of this time of year, an e-tailer going offline for 6 hours, just the effect on the reputation they may have, just from negative reviews, things of that nature, negative press. And so those things do trickle out in addition to the real economic losses sustained.
Right, because I've just noticed, Amazon makes tens of thousands of dollars a minute, if not more. So you have not only the loss of reputation, but then that income. So it's just it's can really snowball quite a bit. So Lizard Squad dominated a lot of the headlines recently, but with the Proton Mail instance and the rash of DDoS attacks on secure mail providers by Armada Squad, let's talk about that. Is Armada Squad the next Lizard Squad?
You know, it's interesting. Lizard Squad tends to focus more on the video game related target websites, where Armada Squad recently is focused only on the secure email sites. And so there's a difference there, although Armada Squad's targets, their level of sophistication is much more intense. And you know, there's still a lot not to be known about Armada Squad because they're so new. But it just goes back to the fact that these groups, again, it's all about money, and if you look and see how much money some of these groups have purported to pull down just last year alone, it's a staggering figure, but it also is the catalyst for this problem, because most of these DDoS attacks are not driven by political motives, although some are. Most of them are driven by economic motives, paying a ransom in exchange for letting go of the attack and moving on to the next victim.
So since Armada Squad is fairly new to the game, as you mentioned, I mean, there's a lot of unknowns with them. Do you have any thoughts as to why they're actually targeting secure mail providers like Proton Mail and others? I mean, again, it's not political, but any thoughts on that?
You know, it's interesting because, you know, specifically Proton Mail was put together by the folks at CERN, intended to be an encrypted mail service. So why go after these mail services? And they've hit up 8 or 9 of them. Many of them have refused to pay a ransom, and instead have doubled down. But it is interesting, and I don't have a good answer as to why they're targeting these specific mail carriers versus other targets. But I can assure you this. Other groups are going to see the success that they've had, economically speaking, and they're going to apply it across a variety of verticals. And so imagine the havoc being wreaked across not just email service providers, which generally have better security practices than other industries. And so you think about how much easier it's going to be for groups as they spread their wings across different verticals, and it's scary to think what's in store for 2016.
I think it's definitely an upping the ante between all of them. I'm sure who can drop the biggest bomb or cause the biggest damage. So for them, it's just a constant challenge of what they can shake up and do more damage with. So I agree with you. 2016 holds a lot. So it's all about staying protected. So if you're just tuning in, you're watching the Cybersecurity and DDoS Hangout presented by Nexusguard. Today we're talking with Gabriel C. Murphy. Again, always a ton of information. So speaking of 2016, what do you think is the biggest issue that's facing cybersecurity, and what kind of things will come up? Time for predictions.
So, right. There's going to be, again, the level of sophistication is going to rise. It's all economic driven. There's going to be more ransoms paid because the level of sophistication being more extreme are going to impact not just the intended host but the other carriers, and it's going to have not just an impact on the intended target but also all the other clients of that particular host that's being affected by their one end user, again, which is what happened with Proton Mail. And I think we're going to continue to see that. And so we're going to see the rise of new groups that, again, learn the lessons of Armada Squad and Lizard Squad and come out and target different verticals.
So here's a question regarding Bitcoin, because I know that was used obviously as the way to pay the ransom. So, you know, it's obviously totally untraceable. It's a liability. And I have a question here. All these attackers are demanding the ransom payment in Bitcoin, obviously for a purpose.
That's exactly right.
So they can withdraw it untraced. Does that alone mean we should consider removing it entirely?
No, I don't think so at all. I think that would be bad policy. I think that's like, you know... Do
you think it's reacting out of fear?
Reacting out of fear, and Bitcoin is not the problem. It's just one of the tools used by the groups, one of many tools used. It just happens to be the common financial tool and the payment gateway of choice because of its natural privacy issues. So, but I don't think getting rid of Bitcoin or other electronic payment gateway systems is the way to deal with the problem. So cryptocurrency is here to stay, And getting rid of Bitcoin won't solve this problem at all.
Just a new version of it will probably pop up. So you're right. It's more about solving the problem as opposed to just taking down the means to which it's paid.
Right. That's
okay.
Right.
Well, we are almost out of time. This is a great last question for you. What do you feel is the future for the cybersecurity bill? Do you think it's the first of many legislative efforts to combat cybercrime?
Yes. I mean, our government is usually reactive, and so the problem is cyber criminals operate much faster than our legislative bodies do. And so, unfortunately, I do think it's going to lead to increased regulation, some of which is needed, because we ultimately have to determine who's behind a variety of these attacks. Which, as it turns out, in many cases we know that, and it ends up being usually a lot of these attacks originate on a wide scale out of China, for example. But it's hard to then pull those criminals back into the U.S. or whatever jurisdiction. Nonetheless, there's going to continue to be continuing evolution of the cyber criminal laws, I think, both at a federal and at the state level. I think you're going to see states take action as well.
So here's a question. Do you think the government is simply it's just becoming involved simply because of these attacks are foreign in nature, like from China, as you just mentioned?
No, I think they're taking action because it threatens the economy.
Yes.
And so, fundamentally speaking, this is a threat to the economy. And so that's why the federal government's taking action, in my view. It may be secondarily that there's political things driven by some of these state-sponsored attacks, where our government has been, it itself, a victim, has been reported in the news. So I think those are really the two prongs that are driving our government to try to take initiative here.
I like that answer. That makes me feel a little bit better. I know that if our economy is attacked, we are in big trouble. But it remains to be seen what happens in 2016. Absolutely. You gave us a ton of great information today, though.
Great.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Yes.
Thanks, as always. So where can we go to find out more information about you?
Well, I actually only do private engagements, as it turns out. So if anyone's interested in any security assessments, you can email me at gabriel@gabrielmurphy.com.
Gotcha. Now that is some branding right there. We'll come to you. Listen, thank you so much for joining us today. We really, really appreciate it. If you want more information, you can go to nexusguard.com. They had a ton of great information. White paper you can download, the latest blog articles, DDoS-related information and news. So please go to nexusguard.com, check out the information, and you can also go to our Nexusguard Google Plus page for more information about our next show. We're going to have more amazing guests like Gabriel. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much. It was my pleasure.
Have a great day, everyone. Bye.